Hello, and welcome back to the CanonBull podcast. I am Mono, and today I want to talk about Deadpool. I came across a tweet earlier today where the person was essentially asking which of these characters are overrated. They showed Rogue, Wolverine, Cyclops, and Deadpool. And I think quite a lot of people were saying Deadpool, which for me I felt was very interesting, right? Because I agreed, but I also wondered to myself, how can Deadpool be an overwhelmingly popular character, but also be overrated? And kind of thinking about that, I started to think about how there seems to be a schism amongst a lot of Deadpool fans as to where Deadpool actually sits, what is good about Deadpool and what is bad about Deadpool, right? Some people even argue his character has been ruined by many different media interpretations of the character. So let's get into it. So, naturally, this conversation exists for a reason, right? Deadpool being overrated, right? Like air quotes overrated, because it will depend on who you're talking to. At the end of the day, what do they mean by this guy's overrated? But I don't think it's because the character is bad, right? I think that most people like Deadpool's character, for better or for worse, right? And I think that trying to talk about why this can be a conversation is pretty interesting to me. So, with that being said, what is wrong with the character of Deadpool? Beginning, I think it would be the concept of flanderization. I'm not going to go into it too much, right? I'm not trying to throw around terms and then have them like stand there and be like intimidating or whatever else like that, right? I'm also just trying to bring up the idea that there are quite a lot of characters in fiction who have a trait that is very dominant about them, but that trait sometimes takes priority over other character traits that they have, to the point where we will call it flanderization and basically say that this character, like Deadpool for example, was a lot more than just making, let's say, crude jokes, right? However, because the crude jokes are things that people responded well to, it became an aspect of the character that took priority more than other aspects of the character, right? And that happens so often with the runs of Deadpool that eventually you could argue that the character now devolves into crude jokes and fourth wall breaks, essentially, right? Now, I think that is part of the issue, but that's not Deadpool's character's problem, right? That comes now with the complication of how we interpret the character, and I think that is the core of this entire video. I think Deadpool, to sum it up, is an overrated character because there are so many different people who either interpret the character in ways that are a lot more, I guess, let's say, thoughtful than others, where there are other people who come to the Deadpool character hoping to have some sort of wisecracking, fourth wall breaking mirk with the mouth, right? And because of that, you will have some people not be very happy, while other people being really, really happy, right? And the more of these traits that Deadpool has, let's just say like the mirk with the mouth traits, right? The more these traits get presented to the forefront, the more that the people who like that are obviously happy. Naturally, the ones who don't necessarily like those parts of the character feel then unhappy, right? I'm explaining a very simple topic here, but this becomes the premise here, right? That it isn't just that these things are missing from the character. They are still there. It's just that it seems that something else is covering it up, right? So we're talking now about the fundamental tragedy of Deadpool's character, which is what ties into him being overrated, right? I think Deadpool is a very tragic guy. This is my perspective as a non-super Deadpool fan who's not very well versed in any of the source material of Deadpool or the creator's intentions or anything else like that. I'm just telling you what I see and what I have experienced from what I have seen, right? But to me, Deadpool is a really tragic character. First of all, I always associated Deadpool as being mentally unwell, right? He's this guy with multiple personalities. He's insane, right? He's crazy. And I always thought that initially, I don't know when this changed in my life, but I always thought when I was younger, the reason he breaks the fourth wall and talks the way that he does and makes the jokes that he does is in a way a coping mechanism for his mental instability, but also like a way to just obviously show to the audience that he is crazy, right? So, for example, if I were to talk to someone in the real world and suddenly just turn to the right and go, hey, get a lot of this guy over here, they would think I'm insane because I'm talking to literally nobody. But if I explain to them, oh, no, you're misunderstanding. We're fictional characters in a universe that is meant to be sold as superhero stories. We are not real people. People would tell me I'm insane. They would tell me I'm crazy. And I thought that was Deadpool, right? I did not ever have the impression in my mind that Deadpool had factual information or a meta awareness that he is a fictional character. I thought he was crazy. I thought he was insane, and this is what he believed, right? But it just so happened that he is correct. That's what I always understood Deadpool's fourth wall breaking to be. However, somewhere in my life, something happened, something changed, and my understanding changed to, oh no, this guy, he just knows he's a fictional character. This isn't about him being crazy. He's right. He is a fictional character, and he knows he's a fictional character. Okay, right? Somewhere that happened in my mind. However, I'm telling you this because I think that his insanity, his jokiness, and all kinds of stuff like that, because of my understanding flipping that way, it stopped being a coping mechanism, right? It stopped becoming this way that Wade Wilson tried to cover up some of the insecurities that he had, some of the trauma that he had experienced, or even his self-loathing, right? It now became more indoctrinated into the character, right? That it became now more so an aspect. Did I use indoctrinated right? Sorry, I got distracted there. He became now this character essentially who is the fourth wall breaking because he does have a meta awareness instead of how I initially understood him, which could be wrong, as he was just an insane person who had insane ramblings such as breaking the fourth wall, air quotes. But he was right in a sense, right? And yeah, that becomes like the first layer of all of this, right? That this character's coping mechanism slowly shifts and changes. I'm hoping at least the flanderization aspect of this becomes a little bit more clear as to what I'm meaning, right? That it now doesn't become a coping mechanism to deal with any of these insecurities or even to display a level of that this guy is mentally unwell. He's insane, right? He's got multiple personalities. He's got probably bipolar disorder or something to that effect. But like he's got things going on in that little cuckoo's nest that just isn't right. That stops being at the forefront. It's not a priority anymore. Deadpool is still a crazy guy, but it's not framed in the same way anymore, right? And because he himself doesn't treat a lot of these mental things seriously, we as the audience eventually come to also not treat a lot of these mental things as seriously, right? So his suffering is often dismissed in universe by the writers, by the characters, by Deadpool himself, and by us as being, air quotes, classic Deadpool, right? I always think of the line from the Deadpool movie, fake laugh hiding real pain, where it's like, man, that's like such a real statement though, right? Like it's quotable, it's nice, it's got that Deadpool energy about it, but what if he's being serious? What if he means that, oh yeah, no, that actually hurt, but I'm going to make a fake laugh because I'm hiding the real pain, but I'm also going to announce that it's a fake laugh because I'm hiding the real pain, right? When you have a line like that, it then becomes now a little bit more apparent as to what I'm trying to set up here, right? This character, we can't take him seriously because he can't take him seriously, and characters in universe doesn't take him seriously. So it becomes like this feedback loop, right? Other characters just brush off any sort of cry for help that Deadpool might be announcing to us, and we learn as an audience to essentially just do the same thing, because that's the punchline, right? That's the punchline of the joke. Isn't Deadpool pathetic? Lamau. So yeah, it becomes now even worse as a dismissal in a sense, because that is also reflecting in his powers. And I think all of this might be deliberate, right? That this is a guy who's going to use crude humor and fourth wall breaks to make jokes and deflect actual criticism or actual trauma, but then also physically he can regenerate, which removes any sort of like consequences of physical harm and can also allow for comedy to exist in situations where probably it wouldn't normally, right? Deadpool's healing allows him to get mutilated, right? It allows him to do things like essentially just self-harm, right? He can have any sort of bad habit, right? He can sort of like, for example, he can just use whatever sort of drugs he wants to, consequence-free, right? Because he's got a healing factor, so his body never develops an actual dependence to whatever recreational drug he is using. He could do things like, I don't know, down a liter of bleach, and that's like a gag, right? Because it's like, it's not gonna do anything to him, right? Doesn't matter. It's inconsequential. So every single time Deadpool has any sort of injury or some sort of harm come to his physical being, right? he regenerates, it resets almost, right? And because it resets on the outside, I guess we as the audience once again are trained to believe that it resets on the inside, right? What kind of behavior causes someone to commit these actions to themselves? As an example, Deadpool would be the kind of guy to walk into a bank with a bomb strapped to his chest and threaten everybody in the bank to do as he says or he's going to explode. And then the gag comes in with everybody cooperating and the plan goes perfectly. And then Deadpool goes, man, that was way too easy. And then explodes himself anyway because Lamau, right? But then it's like a guy who does that, if he ever makes a cry for help, you're not going to take something like that seriously, are you? Right? Because it's like, how do you program yourself as an audience member to both take something that is a joke seriously, but also not take it seriously when it matters, right? Like, it's fiction after all, but I think that at the end of the day, this is like a real tragic character. I'm sure we all know someone like this in our life. Someone who makes off-color jokes and you kind of feel like, nah, I think he's being serious. I think she means that. It is a joke, but I think there's something real there, right? And I think Deadpool represents that to the extreme degree, right? Pointing to something like Deadpool 2. I referenced it a little bit earlier with the bleach thing, if I'm not mistaken. I can't remember the movie very well, but I do believe he downs like a whole, like it could be detergent, right? But he like downs like some sort of cleaning material as like a gag, right? And during that entire sequence, Deadpool is trying to kill himself, right? He's trying to commit suicide. But at the same time, a lot of people came away with that movie thinking that that was a really funny sequence. Yes, there were plenty of people who understood the underlying meaning behind that and the intentions, right, of that scene and what it was trying to convey emotionally, right? But at the same time, there were a lot of people who just walked away being like, ha, that's pretty funny. And that was it. That was the entire engagement with that kind of scene, right? So it's just like, at that kind of point, I think that mirrors how the world in universe and out of universe treats Deadpool. We laugh, we quote his jokes, and we ignore his pain, right? And unfortunately, to some extent, we do this to real people in our lives as well. We laugh, we make jokes, and we ignore their pain, right? So Deadpool, in a sense, from my perspective, right, he becomes culturally like this lack of consequence, but as a character, right? That you even can get things like a very famous run of Deadpool's, right? Deadpool kills the Marvel Universe. He's that much of a gag. He can commit something like an atrocity of just killing basically everybody, right, in the Marvel Universe. And yes, the comic book is self-aware, it's self-referential. There's meta-humor, and meta-commentary in the work itself. It is self-aware. I'm not trying to like dismiss all of these things, but what I'm trying to say is that Deadpool can do something like that. He can go around and kill the Marvel Universe in the most brutal and gory ways you can possibly think of, and it can be mocking the audience and mocking itself for what it's trying to do and what it is achieving, right? But at the same time, that kind of speaks to something again, right? You can draw something from that. Deadpool is the kind of guy who can kill all of his friends and you would laugh at it because that's the joke. But like that in real life, pushing people away, actively destroying relationships that you have, that is a sign of self-harm, right? That is a sign that you are not mentally well to some extent, right? And again, I'm not trying to preach about this. I'm just trying to say that this is where all of this ideas to me comes from, of this being like a genuinely tragic character, right? That Deadpool himself is in a sense overrated because a lot of these elements of this character, a lot of this tragic stuff that you can like piece together from looking at him and relating it to your real life experiences or anything else like that, those things get sort of pushed down on the priority list over fourth wall breaks, pop culture references, in jokes and stuff like that, and to some extent even a level of wish fulfillment, right? Because earlier on I was trying to essentially say, but the word comes to me now, Deadpool is an intrusive thought, right? He's like a walking embodiment of your intrusive thoughts, right? So in a way, he is wish fulfillment, right? He gets to do the things you can't do with no consequence. He gets to say the things that you want to say without consequence, right? But because of that, him as a character also gets pushed back, right? You get to imprint on him and be like, oh man, that's so Deadpool. But what you mean to say is that's so me if I was allowed to be, right? And in that way, Deadpool's character doesn't become as important. He becomes very one-dimensional. He becomes very flat. And in that way, a lot of people then think that this guy as a character is overrated, right? It's not because he's actually shallow, but it's just because we sort of are training ourselves as consumers of these stories to ignore certain aspects of this character, right? And I think all of that is really, it's really tragic. It's really interesting that Deadpool in universe can't be taken seriously and out of universe can't be taken seriously. So he never takes himself seriously in his own stories. Whatever amount of pain that he is put through is irrelevant. Doesn't matter, right? Whatever mental fatigue he might be experiencing doesn't matter. He can just make a joke about it and then it's done. We all get to be comfortable, and he gets to keep being the guy we don't take seriously, right? He's like the perfect embodiment of the meme of the guy who's like has the smiling mask, but underneath he's like crying and stuff like that. Like that's Deadpool, right? 100% through and through. But he, in his own mind, thinks he is the opposite, if that makes sense, right? So in Deadpool's mind, his perspective is, I'm the guy who's secretly laughing behind the crying mask, but he's actually the guy who is crying behind the laughing mask. It's just like that inception of that. Yeah, it is the inception, right? The inception of an idea, right? And then it becomes like a thing that you genuinely think to be true and that you believe. I think it's just interesting. I'm obviously just rambling a little bit here, but you guys can tell me what your thoughts are. Do you think Deadpool is overrated? Do you think that I'm just yapping for real, right? And I know nothing about Deadpool's character or the depictions, or even made completely oversimplifications of what the problems with Deadpool's character actually are, or how his characters are being handled by writers, by the fans, or anything else like that. Maybe I completely missed the point of Deadpool Kills the Marvel Universe because, like I said, I didn't read these things. I'm not a super fan. I just know people who talk about these kinds of stuff. And I talk about these kinds of stuff based off of osmosis, right? But that's it. That's been me. I've been Mono. Ciao, ciao.